Grace to you and peace from God who is, who was, and who is to come. Amen. What will come as no surprise to many of you, I really like going to Walt Disney World in Florida. I don't know why. I don't have a rational explanation for it. I simply very much am going to all 4 of the parks there. Now, with my recent health issues, I would often think about Walt Disney World while I was receiving treatments or undergoing procedures. As example, when I had my bone marrow biopsy, I willed myself to be at Epcot, the favorite of the 4 parks there. I imagined myself parking, walking from the parking lot along the monorail on up through security, going past the entrance gates using my magic band to get in. I passed Spaceship Earth. I could feel the spray of the water from the fountain that's there next to the Mouse Gear store. And I imagined myself then heading down the promenade toward the lake by the time that Dr. Al had finally finished the procedure. Willing myself to mentally be at Walt Disney World was how I endured, how I survived having a very large needle bore into my pelvis, or as I was recovering from my cardiac procedures or undergoing chemo treatments. Now, if you want to know about Walt Disney World, or even Walt Disney the man himself, or the history of the building of Disneyland or Walt Disney World, I will willingly share what I know with you, probably to the point where you will wish you hadn't asked me. I've read many different books on the topic. I've gone on lots of backstage tours. I listen to at least 3 different Disney-related podcasts a week. On my car, I have 2 of those magnet stickers on my car. One is for Niagara, the other is for Disney. And if you've ever seen my license plate, you'll understand that it's a subtle tribute to Walt Disney World. Walt Disney World opened in 1971. Pastor Horner goes to monasteries, I go to Walt Disney World. Walt Disney World has been something for me to hold on to. It's been like a rock. And like so many things in our lives, when something is important to us, when something means a great deal to us, we want to tell others. Which then brings to my mind, why am I willing to talk with my oncologist about Walt Disney World? Why am I willing to let complete strangers know about my love and my enjoyment of Walt Disney World? Yet, I am often hesitant, especially when I'm not wearing the uniform. I'm often hesitant to tell others about my love of God. Why am I hesitant to talk about the graciousness of Christ? And so what does it mean then to be a rock? Now, this world in which we live is constantly changing, but it's not just the 21st century. The world has always been in a state of flux, even first century Palestine. It's just been of a different nature. First century Palestine, they were dealing with 2 different cultures, Greek and Roman, bearing down on their Palestinian home life. They had to deal with both the religious and the secular communities, telling them what to eat, where to pray, how to pray, with whom they could and could not hang out. And then Jesus comes along and tells this community of faith that so much of what they had been taught, so much of what they knew could now be forgotten, discarded, ignored, tossed out the window. And because the people are being pulled in so many different directions, Jesus' followers needed something solid to hold on to. You know, I've heard people talk about those who have been a rock in their life during times of tragedy or just throughout life's journey in general. Jesus calls Peter a rock. Now, there's some really fun wordplay going on here in the original Greek, but it kind of loses something because it takes 5 minutes to explain. So just learn New Testament Greek and read this passage. It's really fun. But Jesus did not mean that Peter was literally stone, granite. Rather, I think that Jesus recognized the depth and sincerity of Jesus' faith. Of Peter's faith. Jesus meant that Peter was someone who was solid in his faith, in his belief, in his understanding not only of God, but of life in general. And so Jesus was proclaiming Peter's faith to the other disciples. Now, the thing is, we need to remember this thing about Peter. He really wasn't always all that solid in his belief. Do you remember just a few weeks ago, that great sermon by Pastor Jen, when we heard the story of Peter and Jesus out on the lake, and Peter sees Jesus walking, and he's all gung-ho to jump over the side of the boat and go walking on the water himself. And what happens? He loses his faith, and he starts to go under. Do you remember the story of Jesus on that late Thursday evening, early Friday morning, when he's with a group of people outside of the high priest's palace? And the people are looking at him and saying, you're one of those Galileans, aren't you? You're one of those followers of Jesus. And Peter's all, no, not me, got the wrong guy, don't know him. And yet just hours before that, with the other disciples, Peter is all, Jesus, I would never betray you. And in the book of Acts, we read about where Peter has this amazing vision that he is shown that all food is now acceptable for everyone to eat, for believers to eat. And thereby, by extension, not only is the food acceptable, but it's okay to eat with others who are not of Jewish heritage, that those who are circumcised can eat with those who aren't circumcised. And yet just a couple of chapters after that, Peter very specifically sets himself apart from a bunch of believers who aren't circumcised. Peter messes up several times, and at least once in kind of a major big-time way. Have you ever messed up in your journey of faith? I have. What does it mean to be a rock? Does that mean that our faith is supposed to be unwavering? Does that mean that our faith is supposed to be unmoving? That our faith never changes? And if that is what it means, can any of us ever be a rock? I was asked by a friend of mine who just very recently went to Walt Disney World for the very first time. He's 50 years old. I don't know what's wrong with this man. He asked me, why do you like going to Disney? Do they keep doing new things? And so I had to answer him, I don't know why I like going to Disney so much. But yes, they are constantly adding and changing. Walt Disney's vision for his parks was that they would never be finished, but always growing. And that's what I believe faith is about as well. Change and growth. Now, we often think of rocks as these great, immovable objects. But here's the thing. rocks change. Boulders get broken apart, we call that gravel. Gravel gets broken down, that's known as dirt. Dirt becomes soil, and soil over time gets compressed together and layered up, and depending upon how much pressure is applied, it eventually becomes, once again, rock. Now, hopefully, all of us gathered here have faith. And each of us can have a solid, deep, strong faith, a faith that is alive, that is growing, that is changing, that is being built up, and sometimes that is being torn down. To all of us who confess, as Peter did, that you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God, to all of us, then God says, on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. And by that, I believe that Jesus means that on that rock, and the rocks over there, and all of the rocks gathered here in this room, on each of these rocks, God builds the church. And when all of these rocks come together and stand together and work together, we form a firm foundation of faith. And together, then, we proclaim God's grace and strength and forgiveness throughout not just Walt Disney World, but throughout the entire